Shaw. I'm an Australian-born media artist. Been here in Hong Kong for over 10 years. Came here as the Dean of the School of Creative Media at CityU. I have an exhibition at Osage Gallery titled WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. It was this acronym that was used to describe the early days of word processing. What you see on your screen is what you get out of the printer. And then I added the corollary. What you do is what you see, to signal to the viewer. Art in general, the more you do, the more you see, the more you get. Of course, in my own practice, a very fundamental discovery was interactivity, to create works which engage the viewer in the operation of the work. In that way also make the work performative, in the sense that each person performs the work, has an individual experience of the work, and that this is unique, a unique moment.
For the last years we've been working with a broad vocabulary of materials, including inflatables and other effects, towards making events, usually in the city, in unexpected circumstances.
Indeed, in the 60s and 70s, I was very much involved in bringing my work out into the public sphere. I came to Europe thinking that somehow or other contemporary art had reached the end of the line. And with the Destruction in Art Symposium, I realized it was still possible to shock people. And I thought, good, art is still alive. When I look back, I realized it was also somewhat privileged time, because one could put work in an urban environment which for a general public was unrecognizable. There was a certain purity to that experience. Now, if you do this, people say, oh, that's art. And somehow, by saying that's art, you resolve the problem. And of course, as a young artist, the challenge for me was how does one go beyond the status quo? Formative experience at that time was an exhibition made by Yasha Reichardt, the Cybernetic Serendipity, which was my first introduction to electromechanical artworks and also computational artworks. There's again a lot of serendipity in putting together a show like this. In the trajectory of my own art practice, there are some works which exactly as they were originally. So the Legible City, which was made between 1989 and 91, the current version of Legible City hasn't changed at all from its original version, because I feel that the work as it was made then is complete and is just as viable today as an experience as it was then. As far as the virtual sculptures is concerned, the intention was to reconstruct the experience of the original work. At that time I was using an Apple II computer. The graphics were very, very crude. Images I was creating, which was a cube and a cone, these were meant to be placeholders, like a Malevich black square, which is the placeholder for all the paintings which have ever been made. Just seeing a wireframe cube floating as an augmented reality virtual object. In practice, when I came to rebuild this work, I was also looking at the practical issues, maintenance, right? So the original work was a one-off. It was really a hacked-together prototype, really. And for me, making it robust means using up-to-date computational framework, Unity software, just a small PC. What is important for me is that the tactile experience of the work and the visual experience of the work should, as much as possible, reproduce what the original work looked like and felt like. Quite honestly, the whole history of my work involves fundamentally synergetic relationships with other people, with composers, writers, coders, of course, because I don't code myself. So many of these works involve very deep-going relationships, discussions, and working through ideas. And it's a sort of a give-and-take thing. You have a certain concept, and then at a certain moment, as you work through the engineering challenges, you arrive at a final form. The Golden Calf was originally made in 1994. Significantly, was made at a time when tablets did not exist. Your mobile device was not a screen for looking at images or at videos, it was just a telephone. To make an artwork where I was asking the viewer to pick up a screen in their hands was a totally fresh experience. And then you discover that as you move the screen, the image on the screen is actually like a sort of Magritte-like window into a virtual world that you are moving around. These were all the shock of media at that moment, right? Now we are very familiar with the tablet. This is the language of today's technology. But at the same time, I have new capabilities which I didn't have in '94. I can use the video camera on the back of the tablet to do tracking. I can integrate video so that the reflection you see on the golden calf skin is actually a video reflection of your own presence. This was something which was not feasible in 1994. I've always loved the cinema. Cinematography, I think, is paradigmatic. You have, on the one hand, the development of a whole set of idiosyncratic technologies, the camera, the film, projection, and also you have the creation of a unique environment in which to experience this work, which is the cinema theatre. But at the same time, my feeling about the cinema in the late 60s, early 70s was it was still a passive relationship the viewer had with the image. You were sitting in a chair, just basically with a victim of whatever the director was putting out there in front of you. And so I became very much involved with that movement, which is now described as expanded cinema. How to take the cinematic experience and create bridges to the public, which were actually physical. A projection screen which would explode and which would release stuff into the audience, or a projection environment where the audience could actually jump in. We could liberate the cinema. It was the desire for creating bridges between art and life.
Yes, it is.
So Eavesdrop is along that thread. It's also a project which responds to the challenge of what could be the shape of interactive cinema. And I was actually quite inspired by a Chilean director called Raul Ruiz. I remember reading one remark he made is, how he felt so trapped because he couldn't see what was happening outside the screen. And in real life, that's, all around us. I was thinking, how can I bring that hyper-realism into the cinema? And the solution was to create a panoramic cinema, which means a space of multiple narratives that are taking place in different areas. Despite the fact that the panoramic movie is a linear movie, I'm still giving the viewer, in a way, power over the camera work. They are editing on the fly. They are deciding how long they spend with this narrative and then cutting it together with that narrative. So it's creating a kind of hybrid space, this sort of hybrid between something which has been very carefully constructed and yet with all the open-endedness that is available to the viewer to be able to create their own performance of this movie. This is a movie which never repeats itself.
And a wicked sense of humour. I like that.
Again, this goes back to 60s. There was still at that time a sort of romantic notion that the artist could only be an individual, a single person, and that artistry was some mysterious, sort of emanation of this gifted person, right? So look, that thread, which I would call the thread of expanded cinema, has always been with me, right? And in many ways, I would say that a majority of my works are a development of this language or this métier of expanded cinema taking different forms.